This is the stunningly beautiful Mikhailovskii Cathedral in central Kiev. And in front of the cathedral here in this square, they have arrayed a whole bunch of destroyed and captured Russian armor. And they kind of do it as a morale boost to show that, the enemy is not invulnerable. And somebody who knows an awful lot about how to destroy Russian armor is the guest today in what I hope to be the first of a series of interviews, Malcolm Nance. Now, if you don't know who Malcolm Nance is a former naval intelligence officer. He is the author of several New York Times best-selling books, and he was at one point a mainstay in American media to discuss all things national security. Well, when this war started, Malcolm left that all behind him and came here to help in the war effort. And he's a particularly prominent member, for example, in the International Legion here. And I ran into Malcolm in Lviv and introduced myself because I am an admirer of his work, because both Malcolm and I have seen for years the threat coming out of Moscow. And, I think most of the world now sees that threat. But I introduced myself to Malcolm. We sat down. We began a discourse, collaborations on some things. And in general, it's just always good to have a sounding board. So we would talk about things, and he would approach it from his military expertise and his expertise as an analyst. And I brought to it, my years of being a journalist in the region, and we kind of bounced things off of one another. And then the process would become friends. So he was recently here back in Kiev for a couple of reasons, and I took the opportunity to do this interview. It's always a little bit weird to interview a friend, but that's what I did. So here is my interview with Malcolm Nance. Here you go, the man, the myth, the legend. Welcome back to Kiev. How are you? We missed you.
I'm not in Kiev.
No, this is all an illusion.
I'm telling people that I'm somewhere else right now, and by the time this plays, I'm sure it'll be out. But I love being back in Kiev, because you know why?
Why?
Burned out Russian tanks, baby.
Nothing better.
This is the way I like to see Ukraine, which is people happy, smiling, having ice cream, and destroyed Russian tanks.
I'm all for it. And you'll see people wearing Vyshyvankas today. We're filming this as proof of life. We're filming this actually on
Vyshyvanka Day.
So he'll be gone by the time I post this for security reasons. But this is evidence that we're shooting this on Vyshyvanka Day. Anyhow, welcome back, man. We missed you.
Thanks. Glad to be back.
So I've known Malcolm now for the better part of a year since this war started, and let's talk a little bit about the last time you were here, when you were actually out on the front lines with the Legion. What was it like fighting Russians? I mean, you're a gentleman of a certain age. I'm a gentleman of a certain age.
Yeah.
We remember the Cold War, where we were prepping for war with the Russians. Well, it's finally happened. You've gone mano a mano with Russians. What's your impression?
Well, the first thing is that I would say there are two different Russian armies, right? There's the Russian army that's on the ground, that has the tanks, has the equipment, has the manpower, and then there's the Russian artillery army. And in fact, the Russian army has been described as an artillery, battalion with infantry and tanks attached to it, right? An artillery army with other parts to it. Russia uses artillery willy-nilly everywhere. They just will bombard your positions left or right. And so that is the only part that's really hard. Dealing with this part, the Russian army part, the ground warfare part, that's not a problem at all. You notice that these things are all burned out and have exploded hulks, right? Were viciously vaporized. Well, that's normal. That's very normal, because the equipment they have was all show, and none of it was any go. And apparently in 2017, the Russian General Staff reported to Putin that with this equipment, with the new uniforms that they had, the stuff that they were doing, they were at parity, that they reached equivalency in combat capability to the U.S. Army, which is insane when you think about it. It's insane, because that's never, ever, ever going to happen. And now what you've seen is what an army with heart, a group of people that truly want to fight to defend their wives, their kids, great kids and everything out here on the tanks. And they will fight with their souls. But the equipment that they had was generally second rate, surplus, some advanced technology like the Javelin missile and things like that. But for the most part, you know, the Ukrainians beat them with NATO surplus from the Cold War, not even the most advanced technology that we have. Imagine if they had the most advanced technology. This would have been a rout. The Russians are a paper army, a Potemkin army. And having fought them, let me tell you, I literally ate their lunch one day. And in fact, I recovered from my bags that I left here a fully unopened, captured Russian Spetsnaz meal, MRE, that I'm taking back and giving to the Spy Museum in D.C. to show them we literally could eat your lunch.
You showed me one time a picture when you were out along the front lines of one of a something Russian fob that they just recently they fled, and you took control of it, and there was a mountain, a literal mountain of vodka bottles.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about the discipline and the performance. Because to me, I mean, we have Article 1. You can't, I mean, it's damn near impossible to get a bottle of something if you're in the U.S. military.
You can't drink.
Forward deployed. But the Russians, that photo, I'll show it. You'll see it.
Yeah,
this thing is obscene.
Each one is an individual empty hard liquor bottle, not beer bottles, hard liquor bottles, that by the time that we hit their facility on somewhere around September 11th, and we took that facility, which was a motor pool, a VDV regiment headquarters, and a Spetsnaz headquarters, and this
and the VDV are the
airborne troops, and this mechanized infantry group there. They had gone through thousands of bottles of hard alcohol, but it was just a monument to that. We're fighting a bunch of drunks, you know, and the Ukrainians don't drink like this. I mean, this is insane. They had nothing to do but sit there and get stoned out of their minds.
There's a very famous video of you that was shown on Russian TV, where you're standing there in front of a MLRS system. I believe, or was it a Grad? I don't remember.
No, actually, it was a M109 artillery piece. Yeah.
And they're firing off rounds, and you famously look in the camera and say,
"There you go. What now, bitches? Shit's coming down."
And the Russians went nuts.
Yeah, this was crazy.
But
because I was NATO.
Yeah.
Вот так вот.
What now, bitches?
Ну что, дела у вас плохи?
We were holding that position from the very early morning, and then mechanized infantry came and started rolling through our positions and assaulted Russian positions in a very large way. Then helicopters came. We had MLRS, you know, the HIMARS fired off there, and we were just, you know, sitting there waiting to see how far we had pushed the Russians. This is a good example. By 11 in the morning, when that video was taken, these M109 self-propelled howitzers come charging up. I mean, they're driving fast. And we're like, hey, artillery, why is artillery here? They should be 20 kilometers behind us. What we didn't know was between 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. when the main assault started with mechanized infantry after our special operations assault, that between 4 a.m. and 11 a.m. the Russian line had not cracked, shattered. And the main forces were moving so fast, so far, so fast, that they had to bring up the artillery 20 kilometers just to keep fire support in front of them. And since we were a flow-through unit, our job was to sit there, take the objective, and then the infantry, mechanized infantry, flows through and starts the main assault. And they were gone. They were just haul-assing. And then they were like, we're ahead of our artillery. Bring up the artillery. And one of the video clips that I didn't play was, I'm sitting there and I go, why is artillery here? And I'm like, where did they come from? And then we realized the line is moving fast. And they had to rush up to fire. And then they left. And we were then ordered into our Jeeps, and we drove to what we thought would have been our next morning's objective, this village, where they'd been in it since 11 in the morning. And we were like, that's how fast the Russian line broke. And I don't say break, I always say shattered. It was like a pane of glass, and someone took a sledgehammer to it. And the sledgehammer were all the Ukrainian tanks, mechanized infantry units, and everything. And they just rammed through the Russians. And another interesting thing, we got not one round of Russian artillery fire for 4 days.
No return fire.
No return fire, because you can't return fire when you're running. Right? They abandoned their guns. The guns that were in Russia weren't shooting at us, and the line was shattering everywhere. So, you're in a situation where all you can do is drive in your car, keep your weapons out the window, and let's see where the next contact is. And we're holding about 300 meters away from them, but they ran through the Russians. The Russians made the mistake of sitting there and trying to fight. And, their BMPs were there, and then the Ukrainian tanks came up and just took care of them. And then, boom, everyone's in the city of Kupiansk. Days ahead of when we were expected to start fighting for that city. We thought it would be a hard nut city.
Yeah.
But what it really was the Ukrainian firepower. The Ukrainians masterfully did that counteroffensive, and we broke the Russians.
And they just want to have an excuse. They don't want to admit that they're losing to the Ukrainians.
Right.
So they're doing this whole, it's actually NATO.
Right.
It's not the Ukrainians.
Yeah.
Right. What is your assessment of Ukrainian forces?
Ukrainian forces are very good, and they have one factor that the Russians cannot beat that will absolutely ensure that this war is a complete and utter victory. They have heart. They have their heart. Their families are right here and right behind them. So, like that old saying goes, that it's not the enemy in front of them. They're not fighting for the hatred of the enemy in front of them. They're fighting for the love of their families behind them, and that makes them unbeatable. They would go out with scimitars and sabers and twirl their mustaches and howl like
grandmothers.
And they would beat this army with that if they had the ability. And they don't mind the casualties. They grieve every casualty, every soldier who goes home. You'll see when their casket ceremony happens and they come, villages along the entire route, even if it's from Kyiv to Lviv, which is 7 or 8 hours, by car, they will come out and kneel in front of the casket and make the sign of the cross, out of respect to the soldier that was killed. So they have 1,000% backing of the Ukrainian people, and with that kind of support, you can't be beat.
Sorry again. Yeah. What brings you to Ukraine? Why is a naval intelligence officer who was doing really good with books and his media, MSNBC gig and all the rest of it, put all that behind you and you came here? Why?
Yeah, a couple of reasons. One, I knew some people here, and they were caught up in the first day's fighting, and were saying, "Hey, we're going to die here," and it offended me. The whole concept of the Russians coming here and attacking this nation and this war, which is as big as anything since World War II, the biggest ground war here in Europe since World War II. And I went home. I was home for a couple of days. I went home with the intention to collect all my body armor, my helmet, all of my battle rattle and gear that I had from other conflicts, and I was going back to join the Ukrainian army. And I had been with the army for a day. I went out to Avdiivka and Donbass with General Pavlyuk, General Sersky, and got briefed on this, what they thought would be the invasion. And General Pavlyuk, who's now the commander of land warfare, said, "Hey, why don't you join the army?" Jokingly. And I was like, that's a 4-year contract, which it was at the time. And then once the International Legion started, I said, hey, I have skill and capability that I can give them. And despite what people think, okay, sand sailors, people who work in the Middle East, fight in the Middle East their entire careers, we do not work on desks. I did not work on a desk most of the time. I was out in the field with organizations that had to go bad places and carry weapons. So
what is that? Why I understand why the Russians are doing it. And it's disgusting. But why are our own people there are some people who have a real hard-on for you.
Oh yeah, the right-wing crazies and these guys, the vet bros we call them, So,
What is that? Why, I understand why the Russians are doing it, and
Yeah.
it's disgusting. But why are our own people like? There are some people who have a real hard on for you.
oh yeah, no, there's a whole class of people. I'm going to tell you who they
They've
are.
never been here.
Oh,
they've
it's
never been to a
it's
war.
even
and
worse.
They're armchair generals.
There's a category of Trump lovers that are publicly disgraced figures that are leading this charge. Jack Posobiec. Jack Posobiec kicked out of the U.S. Navy, was a cryptological, kicked out because he had started Pizzagate, which ended up in a hostage barricade where a man went to prison for decades because of his fake, thinking there's pedophiles in there. This guy was in the U.S. Navy with top secret security clearance. They kicked him out, but in his last months, they made him urinalysis officer so they could get some time out of him. Scott Ritter, former U.S. Marine weapons inspector, was just in Russia.
Pedophile.
Scott Ritter, convicted pedophile. And he's just like, Malcolm Nance is fake. Mark Polymeros, this guy actually made up a story where he said that I bought books from him on eBay in, ready for it, 2001. And he only just remembered it a couple of months ago, 26 years later, that I was up bragging to him that I was like some super spy. Was living in Germany at the time, right? He's like, oh, he lives in Northern Virginia. Never lived in Northern Virginia, was living in Germany at the time. Didn't move to D.C. until I met my wife a year later, months later. And so it's like these guys have this thing in their head that they can step back up into the dignified world of right-wing craziness if they can take me down. And so the big thing when I got to Ukraine was I was never in the war. I was in a hotel, remember, 5-star luxury hotel in Lviv, or I was in a hotel in Poland. Everything was fake or green screen. And their whole thing was, well, where's your combat footage? I have plenty of combat footage. Here's what you're not going to learn. What I did in operations was not for your entertainment. Some guys put their stuff out there, right? I have people who are still in my battalion this very moment who have been around here who show their face. They're out there fighting in Bakhmut, they're fighting out in Kupiansk, wherever they're deployed. I'm not going to, I held the top secret clearance for almost 30 years. This is not for your entertainment. But, and these people who are out there, these, the vet bro losers, you wouldn't believe how many of them I find that they're actually fake. Or living in their basement, or incels like Stilgray, right?
Well,
One of Elon Musk's favorite
This
guys.
is the thing that drives me to absolute distraction. Is the fact that they're the guys that I argue with. You have your guys that you argue with. I have my guys that I argue with, the tankies, and you know who you are.
Yeah.
And they're so determined to fit a narrative that's been fed to them clearly by the GRU. I mean, the whole Nazi narrative, all that kind of stuff. And they've never actually physically been here, and yet they decide that they can pretend to be some sort of expert.
Right.
They don't speak Russian, they don't speak Ukrainian, they never step foot here, but they're going to tell me how it is, and I'm here getting shot at. It drives me. Look, I know you're tight for time, but I got a couple of quick other things to talk about. Aside from just being on the front lines, there's another service that you've provided to Ukraine, and you've been instrumental in building up the Legion. What's the status of the Legion right now? What can you tell me? And just what can you tell people?
The most I can tell you is they're constantly engaged in combat every day. So any combat support I can provide to them is a force multiplier. I provide a lot of material. We just bought in 1,100 pre-made, pre-cooked French rations for them, only for the front combat unit. And we have to do that now every 2 weeks, bringing in 1,000+ rations for this battalion. Because they get food out there, but sometimes it gets boiled chicken, or they couldn't get resupply, or they just have a bowl of boiled rice. Not everybody is in a fixed position where they can go to the supermarket or get anything that supplements the basic ration. So
there's been some criticism of kind of how structurally it was built up, but I mean you're building this from scratch, and you're trying to put as many guys that come over. And,
absolutely.
And if they're trigger pullers, and I've heard you say this. You said this to me. As long as they're actually out there fighting, even if maybe some of them they self-inflate themselves to get into the Legion, if they're out there actually doing the jobs,
and we find frauds. We had this guy who came in, 19-year-old, pretended he was a SEAL. And the team that he was going into was actually made up of 6 real Tier 1 operators from 3 countries. And I was like, this is a train wreck, you know, and he's lucky he didn't get beat up, but, you know, we just took him back to the border and sent him back. But the important thing is that the people who are here are doing honorable work. They're helping save Ukraine.
And they're helping defend the Western. They're helping defend the Western world.
Defending democracy.
You know, I agree with you 100%, and I thank every one of them. Before I let you go, we got to look forward a little bit. I know you're tight for time, but look, I got to ask you this. You talk about how it was a damn near rout last time. The Ukrainians went on the offense. We're expecting it again. We're expecting whether it's going to be a campaign or an assault, or whether it's everybody's talking about a counteroffensive. What are your expectations for the counteroffensive?
I think people will be surprised at where and how it manifests itself. That's what happened last time. I think what you should do is watch for where the first assault comes from, and then start looking around where the second and third will come on. So don't look for one punch, look for 3 and a kick in the nuts.
And the very last thing I got to ask you about is why should Americans, and I know there's an issue within the African American community, to an African American audience especially, but also just to all Americans and all Westerners, why care about Ukraine? Why you know, this is a war. Why, you know, we got problems at home.
Yeah.
Why Ukraine?
Well, this is the front line of democracy. Your democracy has been threatened just as badly as theirs. And even though you think, oh, this is not my home, look at these people. These are nice people. This is exactly what it was like on the day that the Russians invaded and decided they would take 1/4 of the world's grain supplies and kill as many of these people as possible. My grandfather and his brother went to France in World War I to stop that. My father fought in the Pacific in World War II. My uncle was in the Army in World War II to stop Nazi Germany. You know, we African Americans always step up to the fight. We always step up for those people who are oppressed and downtrodden. And it may not happen in our country, but we know it will ripple back to our country and ripple into the African American community too.
If Russia survives this, and if Putin survives this, they're going to keep messing with us domestically, as you and I are both well aware of the interference that the Russians have done internally within the United States.
Yes.
Who do you think the Russians are going to give their money to? They're going to give it to Black Lives Matter, maybe, to keep friction going on. But where's the money really going to go? The money's going to go to the white Christian nationalists that are fellow travelers with them. I mean, and that ain't good for the African American community. If MAGA is getting a lot of, FSB, GRU money, it ain't going to be good.
When Donald Trump asks a question like, oh, you know, or Marjorie Taylor Greene, why shouldn't this money be kept in the United States for welfare programs and things like that? Why are you sending it to Ukraine? They're not keeping it for welfare programs. They don't care at all about the African American or the people of color or women. They intend to keep that money for themselves, and they would rather see this country go to a ex-communist KGB dictator because they could make money off of it.
And they don't care about the African American.
They don't care about the black community.
All they want to do is fracture America.
Yeah.
They've got no interest actually in helping any sector.
And there's a huge Afro-Ukrainian community
There
here.
is. That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
I mean, which puts paid to this whole idea of this country being made up of Nazis.
All right.
You've got things you got to do, Malcolm. It's been a pleasure talking to him. This man is a good friend and a good friend to Ukraine, and I'm proud to call you a buddy.
Right.
And this is a great American. So thanks you, Malcolm.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Malcolm, for the time, and we'll see you. We'll see you next trip.
Okay.
All right, man. Thanks.
All right.